It didn't arrive with the warmth of family. It didn't even arrive from the man himself. It came from a law firm, a name Ava didn't recognize, stamped with an email signature so formal, so devoid of personality, it might as well have been written by a machine. The subject line was just one word: summons. Not invitation, not dinner, summons. The email opened with clinical precision. Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the presence of Mr. David Sterling and Ms. Ava Peters for a formal dinner at his private residence. There were no pleasantries, no "I look forward to meeting you," no polite hint of welcome, just time, date, address, and the silent weight of expectation. The words might have been brief, but their meaning was not. Ava knew enough from David's stories to understand Arthur Sterling didn't request anything. He commanded, and when he called, people came. This was not an evening to look forward to. This was a summons to judgment. As she stared at the email, her hands tightened on her phone. A dinner like this wasn't just a meeting, it was a verdict waiting to be delivered. She imagined Arthur's eyes, cold, analytical, the way David had described them. She imagined sitting across from him, every movement, every word, every expression measured against an invisible standard she didn't understand. Ava felt a strange chill wrap around her, like someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. In that moment, she understood this wasn't about meeting her fiancé's father. This was about being measured. And if she failed to measure up, she wouldn't just lose a dinner invitation, she could lose David. Arthur Sterling wasn't just a man in David's life. He was a legend and a ghost. In the financial world, his name carried the weight of empires. Stories about him were told in hushed tones, about the deals he struck, the fortunes he built from nothing, the way he could walk into a boardroom and with a single sentence change the course of entire industries. And then, one day, he simply disappeared. No interviews, no photographs, no public appearances, just silence, sealed behind the high walls of his sprawling estate. To David, his father was both an idol and a shadow. And in the days following that cold summons, Ava watched as her normally composed fiancé transformed into someone she barely recognized. His confidence gave way to nervous energy. His easy laugh vanished. He moved around their apartment as if the floor were made of glass, every step deliberate, calculated. That's when the list appeared. Not a polite set of suggestions, but a survival manual. Rule 1. Do not mention your nonprofit work. He thinks charity is weakness. Rule 2. Do not talk about your humble upbringing. Stick to safe topics, art history, economics. Rule 3. Wear the navy blue dress I bought you and the cashmere scarf. He values appearances above all. And above everything else, Rule 4. Do not be late. Punctuality to Arthur Sterling was not just a courtesy, it was a moral test. David recited these rules like sacred scripture over and over, as if each repetition could carve them into Ava's mind. She listened, but part of her wondered, was this meeting about who she truly was, or about performing a version of herself that would pass his father's inspection? It was like preparing for a role in a play, except the stage was real life, and the consequences weren't bad reviews. They were losing everything. David scrutinized everything: the dress Ava would wear, the shoes, the way she'd style her hair. Even the color of her lipstick was debated, as if each detail could tip the scales of his father's judgment. The list of safe topics became a mantra she was expected to memorize. Art, but not modern art. Arthur thought it was pretentious. History, but nothing too political. Arthur hated debates at the table. Economics, but only in the form of respectful admiration for his empire. Every sentence she might speak was pre-screened, rehearsed in David's kitchen, like lines in a script. Jokes were discouraged, strong opinions forbidden. But above all, above the dress, the topics, the manners, There was one rule that David repeated more than anything else. "Ava, listen to me," he said one night, leaning forward as if confiding a state secret. "Whatever happens, do not be late. My father despises tardiness. To him, being late means you have a disordered mind, that you're unfit. If you arrive late, it's over before it begins." He said it with the gravity of a man warning about the edge of a cliff. And as Ava listened, she felt the invisible clock begin ticking every second between now and that dinner, already charged with the weight of expectation. The train ride had been quiet, but Ava's mind was anything but. Every turn of the wheels seemed to pull her further away from the life she knew. The busy city streets, the modest apartment she shared with David, the small, crowded coffee shop where she'd stop before work. When the train finally slowed to a stop, she stepped out into a different world. The station itself was spotless, almost eerily so, with polished brass fixtures and a waiting bench that looked more like something from a private club than public transit. She decided to walk instead of calling a taxi. David would have told her not to, that it was risky, that every minute mattered, but she needed a moment to breathe. As she followed the narrow road from the station, the landscape began to change. The houses grew larger, then larger still, until they were no longer houses but mansions, each one tucked behind towering hedges and ornate wrought iron gates, the kind you couldn't see through. It was like stepping into a private kingdom, one designed to keep people like her out. The air even felt different here, cooler, cleaner, quieter. Her footsteps echoed faintly on the pavement, the only sound in streets that seemed untouched by time or struggle. For a moment, Ava felt like an intruder, trespassing on sacred ground. She adjusted the cashmere scarf around her neck, suddenly hyper-aware of every thread, every detail of her appearance. Somewhere beyond these walls was Arthur Sterling's estate, and the moment of reckoning she couldn't avoid. Ava checked her watch. 20 minutes. It sounded like enough time, but in her chest, her heart was already thudding like a warning drum. Each step on the quiet, polished streets seemed to sync with that pounding thump, 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 a relentless countdown she couldn't escape. David's voice echoed in her head, sharp and unyielding. "Do not be late, Ava. If you're late, it's over before it even starts." She tried to push it away, but the words kept coming, looping in her mind like a siren she couldn't turn off. The pristine houses on either side blurred into the edges of her vision. She was walking fast now, almost too fast, but the air felt heavy, slowing her down. 20 minutes wasn't just 20 minutes. It was a ticking verdict. Every second lost was another crack in the fragile image David had built for her. Ava could feel the weight of the scarf around her neck, like a tether pulling her toward a standard she wasn't sure she could live up to. Somewhere in the distance, the Sterling estate waited, and with every step, she wasn't just getting closer to it, she was getting closer to judgment. It happened so suddenly, Ava almost walked past without noticing. On a perfectly manicured patch of green, in a town where every hedge was trimmed to perfection and every brick seemed polished, there he was, an old man who didn't belong to this picture. His coat was threadbare, its seams frayed to wisps. His shoes were scuffed and split at the edges, barely holding together. The thin fabric clung to his shivering frame, and his hands, rough, weathered, and trembling, were clasped loosely in his lap. His head hung low, as if the weight of the world had pressed his neck into submission. Ava slowed. Her mind screamed at her to keep walking. "You're already on the clock. You can't be late. 20 minutes is nothing." David's voice echoed again, sharp and relentless. "If you're late, it's over before it even starts." But another voice rose in her memory, softer, warmer, her grandmother's voice. "The measure of your character, my dear, is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you." She stood there for a heartbeat too long, caught between two worlds. One path led her to the Sterling estate, punctual and polished, exactly as David had planned. The other led her to this man, a stranger, in need, with nothing to offer her but gratitude. And in that moment, Ava realized, whichever choice she made, it would say far more about her than any dinner table conversation ever could. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She could almost feel David's list of rules burning in her pocket, rules she was about to shatter in one move. Without another word to herself, Ava reached in and pulled out the simple sandwich she'd packed that morning: turkey, Swiss cheese, whole wheat bread. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across the old man. "Here," she said softly, holding it out to him. "It's not much, but it's yours." He looked up slowly. His eyes were a piercing, unexpected blue. Not the dull, clouded eyes she expected from someone worn down by life. They were clear, sharp, and yet unbearably tired. He accepted the sandwich with both hands, as though it were a gift far greater than its size. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low and raspy. "That's very kind." Ava hesitated. The wind cut through her coat, reminding her how cold it really was. Without thinking twice, she unwound the cashmere scarf from her neck, the $700 scarf David had insisted she wear to look respectable, and draped it gently over the man's thin shoulders. His hands brushed the soft fabric, and for a brief moment, his gaze locked with hers. It wasn't just gratitude she saw there. There was something deeper, something unreadable, as if he was looking through her, memorizing her face. That look stayed with her as she turned away. She didn't know why, but it felt important, like she just stepped into a moment she wouldn't forget. As Ava turned away from the park bench, a gust of cold wind swept past, snapping her back to reality. She glanced at her watch. Her stomach dropped. 17 minutes left. It wasn't enough, not with the distance still ahead, not with the winding roads and guarded gates. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was going to be late. Her pace quickened into a brisk walk, then into a near run, heels clicking against the pavement like an urgent metronome. But the more she rushed, the heavier her chest felt, not from the cold, but from the realization that she'd just broken the single rule David had begged her never to break. In his eyes, punctuality wasn't just important, it was survival. And now, before she even set foot on the Sterling estate, she had already failed the one test she knew David cared about. Each step toward that looming dinner felt like a countdown to disaster. The scarf was gone, her hair was windblown, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She could already imagine the look on David's face, the disappointment in his voice. And yet, deep inside, she knew she wouldn't take back what she had done. If kindness came with a cost, she had already decided it was worth paying. The first glimpse of it stole her breath. At the end of the long, tree-lined road, two towering wrought iron gates stood like sentinels guarding the entrance to another world. They weren't just gates, they were a statement. Thick black bars twisted into elegant curves, each detail crafted with the precision of a jeweler's hand. And at the center of each gate, glinting in the muted afternoon light, was a single golden letter, S. It didn't just stand for Sterling. It stood for power, for legacy, for a name that could open doors and close them forever. The ironwork was so intricate, it seemed almost alive, the golden S gleaming like a seal of approval she had not yet earned. Beyond the bars, the driveway stretched out in a perfect winding arc towards something massive and unseen, shrouded by towering oaks and immaculate hedges. For a moment, Ava simply stood there, feeling the weight of the place press against her chest. It was beautiful, yes, but in the way a cathedral is beautiful. Grand, intimidating, a place where you were meant to feel small. When she reached for the intercom, her hand trembled slightly. This was it. One button press and she would step from her world into his, from the life she knew into a realm where mistakes were remembered and kindness might count for nothing. The gates had barely finished swinging open when Ava saw him. David was pacing at the top of the grand stone steps, phone clenched in one hand, the other raking through his hair in sharp, agitated motions. The moment his eyes locked on her, his whole body stiffened. He strode down the steps in quick, clipped strides, his face pale but burning with a cold, restrained fury. "You're 17 minutes late," he hissed, the words landing like a whip. 17, Ava. Do you understand what that means? He hates tardiness. I told you. I told you this wasn't a game. Ava opened her mouth to explain, but his gaze dropped and froze. "Where?" he demanded, voice low and shaking with disbelief. "Is your scarf? The cashmere scarf I told you to wear." I gave it away," she admitted, still breathless from the walk. His eyes widened in horror. "You gave away a $700 scarf? To who?" "To a man on a bench. He was cold," she said quietly. For a moment, he just stared at her as if the words didn't compute. Then it came the rush of sharp, cutting sentences, each one striking with precision. "Unbelievable! Do you have any idea what's on the line tonight? You think this is one of your little non-profit charity cases? This is my father, Ava. Every single thing about tonight matters. How you look, how you speak, what you wear. And you show up late, flustered, and without the one respectable thing I told you to wear. He stopped, jaw tightening, but the damage was done. You're a liability." The word hung between them like poison. The word liability still hung in the air, sharp and ugly. For a heartbeat, Ava felt the sting. The old version of herself, the one from months ago, would have crumbled under it, swallowing the hurt just to keep the peace. But now, looking at David's clenched jaw, the tightness in his shoulders, and the desperate flicker in his eyes, she saw something else. This wasn't pure anger. This wasn't disappointment born from love. This was fear raw, consuming fear. He wasn't just afraid of her making a bad impression. He was afraid of losing the approval of a man who had built his life on judgment. And in that fear, he had forgotten who she was and why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Ava took a slow breath. The cold air burned her lungs, but it cleared her mind. If giving away her sandwich and scarf, if pausing to show kindness to someone invisible to the rest of this perfect little town was the thing that would cost her a place in the Sterling family, then so be it. Better to be rejected for who she truly was than accepted for someone she pretended to be. The moment the massive oak doors opened, a wave of cold, still air washed over Ava. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the weather. It was the kind that seeped out of stone walls and silence, the kind that lived in places where warmth was a guest, not a resident. The grand foyer stretched out before her, vast and echoing, its black and white marble floor gleaming like polished ice. The walls were lined with oil paintings of solemn-faced ancestors, each one staring down with eyes that seemed to weigh her every step. Every sound, the click of her heels, the rustle of her coat, bounced back at her, magnified by the emptiness. It felt less like she was entering a home and more like stepping into a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. The butler moved ahead with quiet precision, his footsteps soundless on the marble. David walked stiffly beside her, but Ava barely noticed him now. Her focus was on the long, dim hallway ahead, a corridor that seemed to stretch into eternity, drawing her toward whatever judgment waited at the other end. In that moment, she wasn't just walking through Arthur Sterling's house, she was walking the last few yards before sentencing, and she had no idea if the jury, or in this case, a single man, would see her as innocent or guilty. The butler pushed open the tall double doors, and Ava's eyes followed the line of the massive dining table that seemed to stretch on forever. And then she froze. At the far end, seated in a high-backed chair like a king in his throne, was the man from the park bench. The frayed coat was gone, replaced by a tailored suit, but draped over his shoulders as if it belonged there all along was her cashmere scarf. For a heartbeat, her mind refused to process it. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. Her heart stuttered in her chest, the sound of her pulse suddenly deafening in her ears. The room seemed to shrink, the air turning thick, heavy. Beside her, David's steps faltered. She didn't need to look at him to know his face had gone pale. The silence between them was deafening, but it was clear they were both thinking the same impossible thing. The homeless man was Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling didn't even look at David at first. His clear blue eyes were locked on Ava, and there was a knowing warmth in them, the same warmth she had seen on that park bench. "Welcome, Ava," he said, his voice calm, but carrying easily to the far end of the table. "I must apologize for my appearance earlier today. You see, I have a habit, an old, admittedly eccentric one, of testing people before they ever sit at my table." David shifted uncomfortably beside her, but Arthur didn't turn his gaze. "I dress as someone invisible," Arthur continued, "someone the world steps around, and I watch. I watch not for wealth or eloquence or pedigree, but for character." His words cut through the silence, each one deliberate. "Today, you were late, by my son's measure, a grave offense. But by mine," he leaned back slightly, his fingers brushing the cashmere scarf draped around his shoulders. "By mine, you passed. You saw a man in need, and you acted. You gave your lunch, you gave your warmth, without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return." Arthur's gaze finally shifted to David, and the warmth was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold. "You," he said evenly, "were so concerned with appearances and rules that you failed to see the value in what she did. That is not strength, Davey. That is fear, and fear will never build anything worth keeping." The room was so quiet, Ava could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above them. Arthur's focus never wavered. Once his sharp words to David faded into the stillness, he turned back to Ava, and it was as though the rest of the room ceased to exist. He didn't ask about her resume, her family's wealth, or how she planned to fit into the Sterling name. Instead, his first question caught her off guard. "What are you reading right now?" The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. She told him about the novel on her nightstand, a story about resilience and second chances. His eyes lit with curiosity, and he asked what she liked most about it. From there, the questions flowed naturally. He wanted to know about her work at the nonprofit, the very subject David had told her to avoid. She spoke freely, telling him about the community garden project, the children she mentored, the nights she stayed late because a single parent needed someone to talk to. Arthur listened with the kind of attention that felt rare, leaning forward slightly, nodding, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. When he asked about her childhood, Ava didn't sugarcoat it. She spoke about her parents, a school teacher and a nurse, and the small book-filled house where money was scarce but love was abundant. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't try to edit herself. And for the first time that night, Ava felt like she wasn't on trial. She was simply being seen. Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying Ava for a long moment, as if weighing the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was a quiet force beneath it. "Ava," he said, "I've spent my life surrounded by people who can talk about values, but very few who actually live them. Money, status, education, they're tools, nothing more. The only thing worth holding on to is your character. And the only thing that makes it whole is compassion." He reached up, fingers brushing the cashmere scarf still draped over his shoulders. "This," he continued, "isn't just fabric. It's a choice you made, a choice that cost you time, comfort, and, by all accounts, the approval of my son, and yet you made it without hesitation." Arthur folded the scarf neatly in his hands, then extended it toward her. His expression softened into something almost fatherly. "This belongs to you," he said, "and I hope you'll wear it knowing it's not a luxury, it's a badge, a reminder that in a world obsessed with appearances, you chose to see the human being sitting in front of you." Ava accepted the scarf, the warmth of it lingering in the fibers, and in that moment, she knew it was more than just a gift returned. It was a mark of respect. Arthur's gaze shifted from Ava to David, and the change in his expression was immediate. The warmth that had been in his eyes only moments ago was gone, replaced by a cool, assessing sharpness. "David," he began, his tone measured but carrying the weight of authority that filled the room, "you should understand something very clearly. Your place in my company and in my life is secure tonight, but not because of you." David's jaw tightened. "Father," Arthur raised a hand, silencing him. "No, you need to hear this. The way you measure worth by punctuality, by appearances, by the cost of a scarf is shallow. A man who cannot recognize the value of character in others will never recognize it in himself." He let the words hang for a moment before continuing. "If Ava weren't the woman she is, if she hadn't shown me who she truly was before she even stepped into this house, we would be having a very different conversation right now. You would be walking out of here with nothing but regret." Arthur's voice dropped slightly, but the edge in it was sharper than ever. "Do not underestimate her. Do not dismiss her values. If you are wise, you'll learn from them. If you don't, one day you may find she's the only reason you were ever worth my time at all." David looked down, his face pale, the words landing heavier than anything his father had said to him before. The ride back was wrapped in silence. The hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of tires on gravel were the only sounds between them. David kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Ava stared out the window, watching the darkened countryside roll by, the events of the evening replaying in her mind like a film she wasn't sure she'd ever forget. It wasn't until they were halfway home that she noticed his shoulders trembling. At first, she thought it was the cold. Then she heard it, a sharp, uneven breath, followed by another. When the first tear slipped down his cheek, David finally pulled the car to the side of the road. He leaned forward, resting his forehead on the steering wheel, and the dam broke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "God, Ava, I'm so sorry. For tonight, for the way I spoke to you, for the last 2 years of letting fear run my life. I've been chasing my father's approval so hard, I forgot about yours. I forgot who you are. I forgot why I love you." The words tumbled out between sobs, raw and unpolished. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. The armor stripped away, the desperate man beneath laid bare. 3 months later, the wedding day arrived, and it looked nothing like the plan David once thought was necessary. There was no marble-floored country club, no champagne tower reaching toward a chandelier. Instead, sunlight spilled over the modest garden of Ava's parents' home. Rows of wooden chairs lined a grassy aisle surrounded by flowers her mother had tended herself. The air smelled faintly of roses and fresh-cut grass, and laughter floated easily across the yard. Arthur Sterling was there, but not as the intimidating figure from David's stories. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the kind that spoke of quiet wealth rather than ostentation, and draped around his shoulders like a medal of honor was the cashmere scarf. The same one Ava had given away without hesitation on that cold afternoon. When their eyes met across the crowd, Arthur gave her a small, knowing nod. No words were needed. That scarf had become more than an accessory. It was a symbol of the choice she had made, of the values she refused to trade, and of the bridge that now connected two worlds. David stood at the altar, a humbler man than he had been months before, his expression filled not with nervous pride, but with gratitude. And when Ava walked toward him, she felt no performance, no need to prove herself, only the quiet certainty that this was exactly how it was meant to be. As the evening light faded and the last guests drifted away, Ava stood in the quiet of her parents' garden, the hum of the celebrations still lingering in the air. She thought back to that cold afternoon, the park bench, the trembling hands, the simple sandwich, and the scarf she hadn't hesitated to give away. It was such a small act, yet it had changed everything. Arthur's words from that night echoed in her mind. Character and compassion, they are the only currency that never loses value. And she realized something unshakable. A person's worth could never be measured in net worth or titles or the circles they moved in. True worth revealed itself in the quiet moments, in the choices made when no one was watching, in the way you treated a stranger who could give you nothing in return. That was the test she hadn't prepared for, and the only one that truly mattered. Life will always hand us tests, sometimes the ones we know about and prepare for, and sometimes the ones that appear out of nowhere with no warning at all. But the most important test usually has nothing to do with knowledge, skills, or appearances. It has everything to do with how we treat other people. Your true worth is revealed in the moments when no one is watching, when you face a stranger who can offer you nothing and you still choose to do the right thing. That's the kind of value you can't buy, can't borrow, and can never lose because it's part of who you are. If you believe that kindness and character are still worth holding on to in this world, show your support by subscribing to our channel and turning on the notification bell so you never miss another story that speaks to the heart. Every single subscription helps us keep sharing powerful, meaningful stories, and it means the world to us.